Street United Methodist Church in Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our Wesley Bible class, and we are studying the book of Deuteronomy, and we're into chapter 3 of this book. Chapter 3 has to do with the initial conquest of the Promised Land, and I put that in quotes because this is a territory that is east of the Jordan. The Promised Land is basically west of the Jordan and encompasses an awful lot more territory than what Israel had conquered or ever would conquer. But this territory west of the Jordan is interesting, and we'll see how the war was conducted and why it's important for the Deuteronomists to have described warfare in this way. Okay. So what's happening now is that they are coming up on a region north of the Dead Sea to the east of the Dead Sea. Okay, so we're talking in here. Let me get that over so people can see it. Da-da-da-da. Okay, and that's this area here is what we're talking about. Okay, verse 1. When we headed up the road to Bashan, King Og of Bashan came out against us, he and all his people, for battle at Edrei. The Lord said to me, "Do not fear him, for I have handed him over to you along with his people and his land. Do to him as you did to King Sihon of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon." They did everything to the people of Sihon and the Amorites. They annihilated the people, stole their property, and occupied this territory. At that time we captured all his towns. There was no citadel that we did not take from them. 60 towns, the whole region of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. All these were fortress towns with high walls, double gates, and bars, besides a great many villages. And we utterly destroyed them, as we had done to King Sihon of Heshbon, in each city, utterly destroying men, women, and children. But all the livestock and the plunder of the town we kept as spoil for ourselves. This is not the kind of model warfare that we advocate today. Okay, it's kind of interesting when we look at what's going on right now in the conflict in Israel. Israel is being accused of committing genocide against Gaza. And if you look at everything that Hamas has been saying and everything that the Palestinian Authority has been saying and everything that Hezbollah has been saying, they have been advocating genocide in Israel since the founding of Israel. They're not interested in taking control of the place and installing a new government or anything like that. What they're interested in is annihilating the Jews in Israel. And they've been advocating for that for as long as I've been alive. And right now Israel is doing everything it can to protect civilians in the middle of a conflict in an urban area, which is virtually impossible to do. But they're doing a remarkable job. And the thing that is surprising, now I don't go by any of Hamas's estimates of casualties for civilians, because they don't differentiate between civilians and Hamas and fighters. But even then the numbers are exaggerated. And very often the cause of those deaths is misrepresented. A lot of times the cause of those deaths can be attributed to Hamas and not to Israel. But Israel is doing more to preserve civilian life in its combat than the United States does to preserve civilian life in our combat. Just put it that way. Because I'm familiar with what we do, and everything that I hear out of Israel is just, holy cow, why are these guys restraining themselves like that? It's just, we would never. Like put a marker on a building that you're going to hit minutes before you hit it. It's like, I'm sorry, we wouldn't do that. We just all of a sudden surprise people, you know, that kind of thing. But this genocidal warfare that you see described all through the Pentateuch is a form of warfare that was common in that age by not just Israelites, but by other societies as well. And I think that a lot of the other warfare that took place in that region was not entirely genocidal, that they considered the people to be part of the spoils of the battle. Very commonly, if you were taken prisoner, you were sold as a slave. If they came into your town and overtook your town, they might kill the people that were not worth selling, but they would keep the ones that were and have them as slaves. This happened later on in the conquest of the Promised Land. From time to time, Israel did not kill everybody. And from time to time, they would take whole populations and turn them into conscripted labor. And sometimes they would take foreign women captive, and there was a provision for them to marry them. And we even saw that in Numbers. That was a provision that was made. Why are they doing this? The excuse that is used is that God promised them this land. That's the excuse, okay? And that is the excuse for every genocide that's ever been committed. That some God has foreordained it, okay? And that the people who then occupied that land were totally expendable as a result. So the references back to the Old Testament are the references that this country used in its explanation for manifest destiny and taking over Native American lands. It was our right by God to go all the way to the Pacific. That all that land was open to us. And while we celebrate our settlers and how brave they were for conquering the wilderness and all that, it wasn't a wilderness to the people who lived there. Okay? That's the rationale that was used by Germany going into Russia. Germany need Lebensraum, they need room to expand, and it was God's foreordination that they should be able to go over and take over territories to the east and annihilate the people. We look at what happened to the Jewish and the Roma under Hitler, but Hitler had that plan for everybody in Poland. He had that plan for everybody in Russia. He was going to use them as long as they lived, and then if they didn't die fast enough, he was going to kill them. So that was, he was not just genocidal towards Jews. He was genocidal to a lot of people. In the camps, he killed 8 million people, and 6 million of them were Jews. Okay, a lot of them were Polish and Russian prisoners.
They did. He killed the infirm, the sick,
yes,
the crippled, the
anyone who would be a burden on society.
Retarded, gay people.
Yes. Yeah, he was a pretty nasty guy, and he had a whole population behind him.
That elected him.
Yeah, they did. They not only elected him, but they authorized him to have more power than the elected office called for. They elected him as president, and he made himself chancellor. So he went beyond what the election allowed. And that's what dictators do, always. Okay, so what else is going on here? What's the story behind the story? The history of this region, from the time of the Deuteronomists, okay, the contemporary history of that region was that The northern kingdom had already been attacked and overrun by the Assyrians. The people had been carried off in the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom became a vassal state of Assyria. There was an attempt by Assyria to conquer Jerusalem, which failed. There were things going on back up in Assyria that were weakening the monarchy. Eventually they got taken over by the Babylonians. But in the interim period when Assyria was weaker, there was Josiah's reform and Josiah's attempt to reestablish the nation of Israel. Okay? He was hoping that Egypt wouldn't bother him. Okay? He was hoping that the people who were east of the Jordan wouldn't bother him while he did this. It was kind of a vain hope. But you had just 2 tribes left in the southern kingdom that made up Judah. And they were militarily weak. So the story that he's propagating here is that the people are encouraged by God to go into these territories and take over these what they call here kingdoms. They were like counties. Okay. And they were militarily weaker than the people that they were going to displace. So the story here is that even though they were weaker than the people that they were displacing, including giants and fortified cities and all of this, that God filled their adversaries with terror, and they were demoralized and made vulnerable. And the people were able to defeat them, even though militarily they shouldn't have been able to. Okay? So what Josiah is saying to his people is, see, God did this before. And we may feel like we're weak, okay? But God will fill the Assyrians with terror and anyone else that comes against us with terror, so that when we go into battle, God is going in before us and God will sweep our enemies before us. And so we need to reestablish ourselves as a nation and get back to our first principles and back to the law. And if we become obedient to God, then God is going to bless us in this endeavor. Okay? Before any country goes into a military exercise or conquest or anything, the first thing that the leadership has to do is to call to the people to be more disciplined than they had been. The leader says, don't take things for granted. Don't think that, we can get away with what we've been getting away with before. We have to be committed. So Roosevelt called for a mass mobilization of the country, okay, a total war that involved not just the people on the battlefield, but everybody back home in the factories and on the farms. All of this was part of a war effort. It was a mobilization of the entire population. And our adversaries had no idea what it meant for this country to get mobilized. They really did not think that we had the capacity to do what we did. And they were stupid. They really were. But in this situation, you don't have that big industrial base or anything like that. He's just calling the people to be disciplined, to have faith in God, to be obedient to God, and then God would just take care of whatever battles they were going to get into. Okay? And apparently with these 2 little conquests, but they really were little, the people saw evidence that God was on their side. Okay?
We were watching a program last night talking about the mobilization of our country at that time. In today's time, that you would find any way you could not to serve.
Right.
In those days that you're just describing, men actually committed suicide because they could not serve.
Yeah.
They were turned down.
Yeah. Yeah, we saw a resurgence of that kind of commitment right after 9/11. And believe me, when I went into Desert Storm, the army that I went into was vastly different than the army that I saw during Vietnam. Vastly different. Not taking away anything from the guys that were put in those situations and did really a magnificent job in spite of horrible leadership. Everybody that I saw in Desert Storm was there because they wanted to be. They were all volunteers. They all, and they were well led. Their officer corps, their NCO corps were all professional. They were really, really professional. And the thing that infuriated everybody more than anything else during that whole exercise was bureaucratic incompetence, and a lot of that came from the civilian employees of DOD. I ran into it. That's where the combat should have been. Anyway.
There was a Japanese leader that said after Pearl Harbor, I'm afraid we have just awoken a sleeping giant.
Yeah, that was Yamamoto, the guy who designed Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because he was a naval attaché in Washington for years before the war. And he was able to go to the military academies. He was able to look at the industrial base that we had, the population that we have. And he said, "What are you, stupid? Do not attack this country." You know, but they were stupid and they did. There's a certain amount of overconfidence that comes from this. And by the way, that same overconfidence also infected Israel when it came to coming up against Babylon. So you had kings that should have made concessions in order to keep the Babylonians off, and they didn't make the concessions to keep the Babylonians off, and they got whacked. So you just got to understand relatively. Whenever somebody says that God is on your side, you better check that. Just saying.
So when they were leading into this,
Yeah.
who was leading Israel? Was it still Joshua?
No, it was Moses.
So Moses.
Moses is all through Deuteronomy until the very end. And what you have in Deuteronomy also is very interesting, because a lot of the stuff that you see in other parts of the Pentateuch are reduced to speeches made by Moses in Deuteronomy. So a lot of the codification of the law and things like that come through speeches that Moses is making.
So Dennis, I just wondered, in verse 11 there, it talks about King Og's bed. 13
Yeah.
feet long. I wonder what the significance, I wonder if he was physically a huge guy,
They say he was a big guy.
13 by 6 feet.
Yeah, of course, I don't think they're making allowances for what companions he might have had with him in the bed, but anyway. Sometimes you just need a bigger bed, I'm just saying. Anyway.
So they had king-size beds back then.
Yeah.
Or stones, king-size stones.
Well,
Do you know why there were not many beds in the American colonies during the colonial period? There were not very many beds. Do you know why?
Because of bed bugs.
No,
Yeah.
no. There weren't many beds because there was a tax on beds.
where did they sleep, on the floor?
Yeah, they had, mats. Yeah,
Tax on
there
bed.
was a tax on beds.
Was this from England?
Yes, from England. Yep.
I think that was sort of irked me too.
Mhm.
At least they couldn't get thrown out of bed if they were attacked.
That's true. That's true. Anyway, no, beds were considered a luxury, and so there was a luxury tax on beds.
And made of iron.
Yeah, Yeah, it was, ostensibly it was made of iron, you know.
I
But,
think a scarce commodity, you would think.
well, the thing that's really interesting is that this is still kind of the Bronze Age, so, oh well. If somebody had iron, they probably were making plows and swords and stuff out of it.
Yes.
But if you're king, you know. Okay. So at that time, we took from the two kings of the Amorites the land beyond the Jordan, from the Wadi Arnon to Mount Hermon. The Sidonians call Hermon Syrian, while the Amorites call it Sinir. All the towns of the tableland, the whole of Gilead, and all of Bashan, as far as Salakah and Edrei, towns of Og's kingdom in Bashan. Now, only King Og of Bashan was left in the remnant of the Rephaim. In fact, his bed was iron. Can still be seen in Rabbah of the Amorites. By the common cubit, it was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. So a cubit was maybe a foot and a half. So, big guy, big bed. Okay. As for the land that we took possession of at that time, I gave it to the Reubenites and the Gadites, the territory north of Aror, that is on the edge of the Wadi Arnon, as well as half the hill country of Gilead, with its towns and regions of Argob. All the portion of Bashan used to be called a land of Rephaim, which are giants. Jair, the Manassite, acquired it, the whole region of Argob as far as the border of the Geshurites and the Maacathites, and he named them, that is Bashan, after himself, Havoth Jair, as it is to this day. So to Machir I gave Gilead, and the Reubenites and the Gadites I gave the territory from Gilead as far as the Wadi Arnon, in the middle of the Wadi as a boundary, and up to the Jabbok, the Wadi being boundary of the Ammonites, the Arabah also, with the Jordan and its banks from Chinnereth down to the Sea of Arabah, the Dead Sea, with the lower slopes of Pisgah on the east. So they included North Carolina. Okay. At that time, I charged you as follows. Although the Lord your God has given you this land to occupy, all your troops shall cross over armed as a vanguard of your Israelite kin, only your wives and children and your livestock. I know that you have much livestock, shall stay behind in the towns that I have given to you, when the Lord gives rest to your kindred as to you, and they have occupied the land the Lord your God is giving them beyond the Jordan, and each of you may return to the property that I have given to you. And I charged Joshua as well at the time, saying, your own eyes have seen everything that the Lord your God has done to these two kings, so that the Lord will do to all the kingdoms into which you are about to cross. Do not fear them, for it is the Lord your God who fights for you. All right, so the deal was that these tribes that are staying, that are going to occupy the East Jordan area, the Transjordan area, have a lot of flocks. The area in the Transjordan is very fertile, good for grazing. They have cattle and sheep and all kinds of stuff. They say, this is good livestock territory, how about giving it to us? And if you look at the previous argument, Moses said, yeah, right, we're going to give you that, and then everybody else is going to cross over the Jordan, and they're going to have to fight for the rest of it, minus your tribes. And they said, oh, no, we'll be part of the fight. In fact, we'll be the vanguard. And so the people from these tribes are going to be the vanguard of the invasion going into the west side of Jordan. And then, when everything is settled, then they can go back to the territory on the east side of the Jordan. This territory east of Jordan is important militarily because it represents two things. It represents a buffer zone from attack from the east, okay, and it is also a rich, fertile base for logistics purposes. You can get food and supplies from the prosperity of the East Jordan. So that's basically their agricultural and not necessarily their industrial base, but it's, the agricultural base is what they need in order to feed the troops and everything. So these people are going to be pumping supplies and stuff from the territories that they've occupied. Long term, it was not such a good deal, because at the same time that these people occupied a fertile area, if you go a little bit further east, it's not that fertile. Okay? And if you have a not so fertile area occupied by people who are looking at a fertile area, what do you think is going to happen? Okay? And there was constant raiding, constant conflict, and battles being fought on the east side of the Jordan because of, it's a good target. There was a lot to steal. So you had raiders. They were camel cavalry that would come across and raid the territories. So that was a constant thing, went on over and over and over again. It was going on during the time of Saul and David. It's just always happening. So, okay. At that time, too, I entreated the Lord, saying, O Lord, you have only begun to show the servant your greatness and your might. What God in heaven or on earth can perform the deeds and mighty acts like yours? Good question, because the question presumes that there are other gods. Okay? So while this group worships this God, Moses is not discounting that there are other gods. Just a thought. Okay, so we're not looking at a pure monotheism here. This is just an early iteration. Okay. Let me cross over to see the good land beyond the Jordan, the good hill country, and the Lebanon. But the Lord was angry with me on your account, your meaning the people, okay, and would not heed me. The Lord said to me, enough from you. Never speak to me of this matter again. Go up to the top of Pisgah and look around you to the west, to the north, and to the south, and to the east. Look well, for you shall not cross over this Jordan, but charge Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, because it is he who shall cross over at the head of his people, who shall secure the possession of the land you will see. So they remained in the valley opposite Beth Peor, and there you go. There's a change in the narrative. Okay, when we got done with Numbers, why was Moses going to be prevented from going into the Promised Land? What was the reason?
Disobey God.
He disobeyed God. Okay? He disobeyed God. Now, in Numbers, it's not because he disobeyed God. It's because the people disobeyed God and he was their leader. Okay?
Really makes a little more sense to me, because what God said he disobeyed doing was really, really petty.
Right.
God told him to speak to the rock and water would come out. He struck it with his sword.
Well, this was rod, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of petty, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, and you're entitled to that.
Well, my opinion's right.
As are we all. As is mine as well.
I'm with Dan.
I'm with Dan
God bless
on that.
you,
You're on Dan. Okay.
Yeah, his opinion is right.
Well, you know what they say about opinions. Okay.
And on the same vein, if he was held accountable for people, I mean, he really can't.
You can't shake that off. Okay. Here's the thing. Okay, when I was a commander, okay, anything that my troops did, and I only had 2 of them, but anything that my troops did, I was responsible for. I could not shirk the accountability. for things that people under my command did. All right? If you're the commander, you're responsible. You can assign authority, okay, but you can't assign responsibility. Not yours. You can make somebody responsible for the authority that you've given them, but ultimately I can't, if I'm in a position to assign people authority, I'm in a position where I cannot avoid responsibility for what they do.
And it's still that way.
And it is still, well, yes. It bothers me when people say, well, I'm fully responsible, but they stay there. I don't know. I'm sorry, it didn't work that way in the organization I was in, anyway.
I'm having a hard time with this, so.
Okay,
Because as a person in authority, and you have troops under you, you are teaching them what to do.
yes,
That is right.
yes.
If they go against that, I just have a problem with it being your responsibility,
It is.
because
I ran slam into this in one assignment where I had a subordinate, totally untrained and unqualified for the position. I had requested somebody who was trained and qualified, did not get that. I had no ability to select the individual who's going to fill that slot, okay? And I got somebody who was well-meaning but totally unqualified. He was very qualified in something else, but not in what I had him to do. And he really messed up. And I had him for about a week, and then I was sent off to training in another country. And when I came back, I found out that he had really, really, really messed up, okay? And let me tell you something. It almost cost me my career.
And you weren't even there.
And I wasn't even there. But he was my troop. Okay? So,
That's not fair.
No.
I mean, it's not fair.
it's what has to happen.
For respect of your
No,
troop, or,
for the business we were in.
okay.
For the business we were in, it had to happen. Okay? I understood that. I didn't think it was fair either. But I understood it. That part I understood. There was a lot of other junk going on that I didn't understand. But
The overall picture.
the overall picture, I got that clearly. And the thing that got me past it was a reminder that I gave to my commander that he was ultimately responsible too for giving me somebody who was not trained when I asked for somebody who was.
Well, that's the part to me that's not fair.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, we all fall. We all fall, okay? And so he ended up not exercising as much discipline as he would have liked, because he was going to be subject to it too. Okay? But it was an embarrassment. And, when you're dealing with the kind of stuff that I was dealing with, there is absolutely no room for embarrassment anywhere. None. Not with the materials we were dealing with. So, I got it. I understood it. Okay? And the thing is, it caught up with Moses. In Deuteronomy, it catches up with Moses. In Numbers, Moses was disobedient. Okay? But in Deuteronomy, he was not disobedient, but his people were, and therefore you're part of the group and you're not going to the promised land. That's the way it is. So, I get it. Okay, well, anyway, we'll get on to chapter 4 next week. But we're going to be looking at Moses' requirement that the people be obedient to Torah, to the law. Okay? So let's go to the prayer. Our Father, we thank you for your blessings. We thank you for guiding us through the lesson today. We pray that there are lessons learned that will be beneficial to us. And be with all who are watching us online. Keep us safe throughout the week, and we'll be back next week to study chapter 4. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Bless you all.
Thank you, Dennis.